They said I was too young to understand real politics. My own parents looked right through me when I tried to explain why their voter registration strategy was going to fail spectacularly. But when the county election supervisor stood up 3 hours later and announced that someone had just prevented the largest voter disenfranchisement crisis in our district's history, every eye in that community center turned to the 22-year-old they dismissed as naive just that morning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Saturday in October, except for the nervous energy crackling through our house like static electricity before a thunderstorm. Mom had been up since 5 arranging clipboards and voter registration forms on our kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she counted and recounted the materials. Dad paced between the coffee maker and the window, checking his watch every 30 seconds like he was timing a marathon. Their monthly Civic committee meeting had turned into something much bigger when they volunteered to coordinate the final voter registration push before the election deadline. What started as a simple community outreach had snowballed into a county-wide initiative, and somehow our little suburban neighborhood had become ground zero for the most ambitious voter registration drive our district had ever attempted. I sat at the breakfast bar, nursing my second cup of coffee and watching them buzz around like caffeinated bees, occasionally trying to interject with suggestions that fell on deaf ears. Every time I opened my mouth, Dad would give me that indulgent smile parents reserve for children who think they understand grown-up conversations. "Honey, we appreciate your enthusiasm," Mom said without looking up from her checklist, "but this requires experience with actual voter outreach. Maybe you could help us carry supplies to the car." I'd been studying political science and public administration for 4 years. I'd interned with the county clerk's office every summer since high school. I'd written my senior thesis on voter accessibility barriers in suburban communities. But to them, I was still the kid who used to make campaign signs out of poster board for my elementary school mock elections. The irony wasn't lost on me that they'd spent years encouraging my interest in civic engagement, but the moment real civic work needed doing, they assumed I couldn't handle anything more complex than folding flyers. "Mom, I really think you should reconsider the location strategy," I tried again, spreading the registration site map across the counter. "The community center is going to create bottlenecks, especially if you're expecting the turnout numbers you projected." She glanced at the map for exactly 2 seconds before gathering it up with the rest of her materials. "The community center has the most parking and the best visibility from the main road. We've thought this through, sweetie. But what about accessibility compliance? And have you considered that Saturday morning conflicts with youth sports schedules? Half your target demographic is going to be—" "Elena, we've been planning this for weeks," Dad interrupted gently. "The committee has decades of combined experience. We know what we're doing." That phrase echoed in my head as I watched them load their car with boxes of materials, their confidence absolute and unshakable. They drove off toward what I was certain would be a well-intentioned disaster, leaving me standing in the driveway with my coffee and my mounting sense of dread. I could have stayed home, should have stayed home. Instead, I grabbed my keys and followed them to the Riverside Community Center, arriving 20 minutes after the official start time to find exactly the chaos I predicted. Cars circled the parking lot like vultures, hunting for non-existent spaces. A line of frustrated people stretched from the registration tables all the way to the sidewalk, moving at the pace of molasses in January. Volunteers scrambled between stations, looking overwhelmed and slightly panicked as more people arrived every minute. I found my parents near the main registration table, Mom frantically shuffling through papers while Dad trying to coordinate 3 different conversations at once. Their calm morning confidence had evaporated into barely controlled stress. "Elena, thank goodness," Mom said when she spotted me. "Could you help direct people to the parking overflow at the elementary school? We're completely swamped." I surveyed the scene with growing concern. The problems went far deeper than parking logistics. Tables were positioned incorrectly for traffic flow. The accessibility station was tucked behind a pillar where wheelchair users couldn't easily access it. Most critically, I noticed several elderly residents standing in the regular line who should have been directed to expedited processing, but the volunteer seemed unaware of the special provisions. "Mom, you need to redistribute the volunteers," I said, raising my voice over the ambient chaos. "The bottleneck isn't parking, it's processing. You have too many people at check-in and not enough at the actual registration stations." "We don't have time for reorganization," she replied tersely, not looking up from her clipboard. "We just need to push through." But pushing through wasn't going to solve the real problem, which became apparent when Mrs. Chen from the county election office appeared at my dad's elbow looking distinctly unhappy. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 20 years managing election logistics, "we have a significant issue with your processing procedures." Dad's confident smile faltered. "What kind of issue?" Mrs. Chen gestured toward the registration tables where volunteers were working diligently, but I realized with growing alarm, incorrectly. "Your volunteers are using the standard registration protocol for all applicants, but you have a mixed demographic here requiring different processing streams. Student registrations, address changes, first-time voters, and restoration applications all have distinct requirements." I watched my father's face go pale as Mrs. Chen continued her assessment. "At your current processing rate, with the procedures being used, approximately 60% of today's registrations will be flagged for additional verification, which means they won't be processed before the deadline." The words hit the registration area like a shockwave. Volunteers stopped mid-sentence. Parents in line began murmuring worriedly. Someone near the back called out, "What does that mean for my daughter's registration?" "It means," Mrs. Chen said, with the diplomatic precision of someone delivering bad news professionally, "that we may need to suspend operations until we can implement correct protocols." The community center fell into the kind of silence that precedes panic. I could see the mental calculations happening on every face. Voters who'd driven here specifically for this event, college students whose only chance to register was today, elderly residents who'd arranged transportation thinking this was their solution. My parents looked devastated. Months of planning, dozens of volunteers, hundreds of community members who'd trusted them to make voting accessible, all about to collapse because of procedural failures that could have been prevented. That's when I stepped forward, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. "Mrs. Chen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "what if we could restructure the processing flow to handle multiple registration streams simultaneously?" She turned toward me with the polite but dismissive expression officials reserve for well-meaning civilians who don't understand bureaucratic complexity. "And you are?" "Elena Rodriguez. I've worked with the county clerk's office for 3 summers, specifically on voter registration data processing and compliance protocols." My parents' heads snapped toward me in unison, expressions shifting from stress to surprise to something approaching mortification. They'd been so focused on their committee credentials that they'd forgotten I actually had relevant experience. Mrs. Chen's demeanor shifted slightly, professional interest replacing polite dismissal. "Go on." I gestured toward the current setup, my confidence building as I moved into familiar territory. "The bottleneck is happening because you're treating all registrations as identical processes, but they're not. Student registrations require different documentation verification than address changes. First-time voters need additional information packets. Restoration applications have their own approval pathway." I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, sketching a rough diagram as I spoke. "If we create parallel processing streams, each handling specific registration types with volunteers trained on those particular requirements, we can maintain accuracy while tripling throughput." Mrs. Chen studied my impromptu workflow diagram, her expression thoughtful. Around us, volunteers and community members had gathered to listen, their conversations creating a low buzz of curiosity and concern. "The legal requirements for each stream?" she asked, testing my knowledge. "Standard registrations need government-issued photo ID and proof of residency dated within 90 days. Student registrations can accept university ID plus enrollment verification. Address changes require documentation showing previous registration and new residence proof. Restoration applications need the completion affidavit plus identity verification but have expedited processing if the applicant was previously registered in the same county. I rattled off the requirements from memory, drawing on hundreds of hours spent helping voters navigate these exact procedures during my internships. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows climbed higher with each accurate detail. And staffing allocation for this restructure? 2 volunteers per standard registration station, 1 for verification and 1 for data entry. Single volunteer for student registrations since those were streamlined. Dedicated station for address changes with someone experienced in database queries. And restoration applications should be handled by your most experienced volunteer because they require judgment calls. The community center had gone completely quiet except for my voice explaining logistics that I'd spent years learning. I could feel my parents staring at me like they'd never seen me before, their daughter suddenly speaking a language they didn't know she'd learned. Mrs. Chen folded her arms, studying me with new interest. Implementation timeline? 15 minutes to reorganize station layouts, 10 minutes to brief volunteers on their specific procedures, and we could be operational again within half an hour. The silence stretched until I started wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake by speaking up. Mrs. Chen exchanged glances with 2 other county officials who'd arrived during our conversation, some kind of wordless communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Show me." What followed was 25 minutes of controlled chaos as we transformed the registration area from a single overwhelmed queue into an organized system of specialized stations. I found myself directing volunteers with expertise I didn't know I possessed, explaining verification procedures I'd learned through repetition and practical application. Mom and Dad watched from the sidelines, occasionally helping move tables or redistribute supplies, but mostly observing their daughter orchestrate something they couldn't have imagined her capable of. The transformation in their expressions was almost as dramatic as the physical reorganization happening around us. Mrs. Patterson, a volunteer who'd been struggling with the original system, approached me while I was explaining student registration protocols to her replacement. "Honey, how do you know all this?" "3 summers of data entry and voter assistance," I replied, adjusting the positioning of her station's information cards. "You learn the procedures pretty thoroughly when you're helping 50 voters a day navigate the system." She shook her head in amazement. "Your parents never mentioned you had this kind of experience." I glanced toward where Mom and Dad were deep in conversation with another county official, their body language shifting from defensive to curious. I don't think they realized it was relevant. But relevance was becoming undeniable as the reorganized registration system began operating with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Lines that had been stagnant for an hour began moving steadily. Volunteers who'd looked overwhelmed 10 minutes earlier now worked with confidence and purpose. Most importantly, the registration processing that Mrs. Chen had projected would fail quality standards was now exceeding county benchmarks for accuracy and speed. I stationed myself at the information hub, directing voters to appropriate processing streams and troubleshooting issues before they became bottlenecks. It felt natural, like slipping into a role I'd been preparing for without realizing it. The real test came with Mr. Johnson, a 78-year-old veteran, approached with a complex restoration application. His voting rights had been suspended due to an administrative error 3 years earlier, and he'd been trying unsuccessfully to navigate the bureaucracy ever since. Under the original setup, his case would have been shuffled between multiple volunteers, each uncertain about restoration procedures, until eventually being set aside for further review that might never come. Instead, I was able to walk him through the restoration affidavit, verify his eligibility using the county database access Mrs. Chen had provided, and complete his registration in 12 minutes. When his name appeared in the active voter registry, confirming his restored status, tears welled up in his eyes. "I was starting to think I'd never vote again," he said quietly, shaking my hand with both of his. "Thank you for knowing how to fix this." That moment crystallized something I'd been feeling all morning but couldn't quite articulate. This wasn't just about paperwork or procedures. It was about democracy functioning at its most basic level, ensuring that every eligible citizen could exercise their fundamental right to participate in their government. As the morning progressed into afternoon, word spread through the community about the dramatically improved registration process. People who'd left earlier in frustration returned with friends and family members. The elementary school that was supposed to provide overflow parking became a second registration site, staffed by volunteers I'd trained on the streamlined procedures. By 3 o'clock, we'd registered more voters than my parents' committee had projected for the entire day, with accuracy rates that exceeded county standards. More importantly, we'd handled dozens of complex cases that would have been impossible under the original system. Mrs. Chen found me near the end of the event, as volunteers were beginning to pack up supplies and community members were filtering out with their new voter registration cards. "Elena," she said, her formal tone replaced by something warmer, "I need to ask you something directly. Are you planning to pursue a career in public administration?" The question caught me off guard. I've been considering it, but I wasn't sure there were opportunities in local government for someone my age. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all day. "There are now." Before I could ask what she meant, I heard someone calling my name from across the community center. Dad was walking toward us, his expression unreadable, carrying a folder I hadn't seen before. "Elena, could you come with us for a moment?" he asked, gesturing toward where Mom stood with several other adults I didn't recognize. As we approached the group, Mrs. Chen fell into step beside me. "Actually," she said to my father, "this timing is perfect." The adults arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, and I realized with growing confusion that this felt less like a family conversation and more like some kind of formal gathering. Mom stepped forward, her earlier stress replaced by an expression I couldn't quite read. "Elena," she began, her voice carrying a formality that seemed strange after our morning of crisis management, "there's something we need to tell you about today's event." My confusion deepened. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. "The voter registration drive was real, and your intervention was genuinely necessary. But there was another component to today that you weren't aware of." She gestured toward one of the adults I didn't recognize, a tall woman in a navy blazer who stepped forward with official bearing. "Elena Rodriguez," the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of ceremony. "My name is Commissioner Sarah Williams, and I represent the County Civic Leadership Council." My heart began beating faster, though I couldn't say why. "Okay." Commissioner Williams opened the folder she'd been carrying and pulled out what looked like an official document. "Every year, our council recognizes one young adult who demonstrates exceptional civic engagement and leadership potential. The selection process involves multiple evaluation criteria, including community impact, procedural knowledge, crisis management, and commitment to democratic principles." I glanced at my parents, who were both smiling now, their expressions mixing pride with something that looked suspiciously like guilt. "This year's evaluation," Commissioner Williams continued, "required observing candidates in uncontrolled situations where their civic knowledge and leadership abilities could be assessed authentically." The pieces began clicking together with sickening clarity. "You mean today was a test," Mom finished quietly. "Not the voter registration itself, that was completely real. But your father and I were asked to coordinate an event that would likely encounter the kind of challenges where civic leadership could be demonstrated." I stared at them, processing the implications. "You deliberately set up a system you knew would fail?" "We set up a system using standard community volunteer approaches," Dad clarified. "We didn't artificially create problems, but we also didn't implement the advanced procedures you suggested, because we wanted to see how you'd respond when your expertise was needed." Mrs. Chen nodded. "The county has been watching your work during your internships. Your supervisors consistently noted your ability to solve complex problems and communicate effectively with diverse populations. When the civic leadership position became available, your name was the first suggested." Commissioner Williams stepped forward again, her formal tone returning. "Elena Rodriguez, based on today's demonstration of civic knowledge, crisis management, community leadership, and commitment to voter rights, you are this year's recipient of the General Carter Civic Leadership Award." The words hit me like a physical force. The General Carter Award was legendary in our county, given annually to recognize exceptional civic contribution. Previous recipients had gone on to serve as mayors, state legislators, and federal administrators. I'd read about the award in my political science classes, but never imagined being considered for it.
The award comes with a full scholarship for graduate study in public administration, Commissioner Williams continued, plus a guaranteed position in the county administrator's office upon completion of your degree. I looked around the circle of adults, my parents' faces beaming with pride, Mrs. Chen nodding approvingly, Commissioner Williams waiting for my response. The community center, which had been the site of chaos and crisis just hours earlier, suddenly felt like the most important place in the world. "I don't understand," I said finally. "You're telling me that my parents deliberately ignored my suggestions this morning because they knew I was being evaluated?" Mom winced slightly. "Not ignored, we just implemented our original plan instead of accepting your modifications." "But we were watching," Dad added quickly. "Every time you tried to help, every suggestion you made, we were taking notes. When the crisis hit and you stepped forward to solve it, that was the leadership demonstration the committee needed to see." The mixed emotions I felt were almost overwhelming. Pride at receiving recognition I'd never dreamed of achieving. Frustration at being tested without my knowledge.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Gratitude for the opportunity, and hurt at my parents' deception, even if it was well-intentioned. "So, when you said I was too young to understand real politics," I began. "We were playing our roles," Mom said softly. "We believed in your abilities, Elena. We just needed the selection committee to see them demonstrated under real pressure." Commissioner Williams stepped forward with a leather portfolio bearing the county seal. "The formal award ceremony will be next month, but I wanted to present you with the preliminary documentation today." She handed me the portfolio, which felt heavier than paper and leather should. Inside, I found an official letter of recognition, scholarship documentation, and a job offer letter from the county administrator's office. But what struck me most was the letter's opening paragraph, which detailed specific observations from my morning performance. Candidate demonstrated advanced knowledge of voter registration protocols, exceptional crisis management under pressure, clear communication skills across diverse demographic groups, and commitment to ensuring democratic access regardless of procedural challenges. They'd been watching every interaction, every decision, every moment when I'd chosen to step forward instead of staying silent. The test hadn't been whether I knew the procedures, but whether I'd use that knowledge to help others when it mattered most. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Chen said, drawing my attention back to the group. "The scholarship and position are contingent on you accepting the role immediately. The county has several voter access initiatives launching over the next year, and we need someone with your skills to coordinate them." I looked at my parents, who were watching me with expressions that mixed hope and nervousness. "You knew about this part too?" "We knew about the potential opportunity," Dad admitted, "but we didn't know if you'd be selected, and we didn't want to influence your performance by telling you what was at stake." The weight of the decision settled over me like a heavy coat. Accept the award and the accompanying responsibilities, stepping into a level of civic leadership I'd dreamed about but never expected to achieve so young. Or decline, finishing my undergraduate degree on my original timeline and entering public service through traditional channels. But really, there was no decision to make. Every summer internship, every voter assistance interaction, every late-night studying election law had been preparing me for exactly this moment. "I accept," I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was committing to. The group erupted in applause, and suddenly I was surrounded by handshakes and congratulations from people whose names I was still learning. But through it all, I kept thinking about Mr. Johnson, the veteran whose voting rights I'd helped restore, and the dozens of other community members who'd left the registration drive with renewed faith in democratic participation. That was what mattered most. Not the recognition or the scholarship or even the career opportunity, but the knowledge that civic engagement could make a real difference in people's lives when it was applied with skill and dedication. As the community center emptied and volunteers finished packing supplies, my parents approached me with expressions that mixed pride, relief, and what looked like parental nervousness. "Are you angry with us?" Mom asked quietly. "About the deception?" I considered the question seriously. The morning had been stressful and frustrating, feeling dismissed and undervalued by the people whose opinions mattered most to me.
But it had also been the most meaningful civic work I'd ever participated in, with results that exceeded anything I could have imagined. "I'm not angry," I said finally, "but next time you want to test my civic leadership abilities, maybe just ask me directly instead of making me think you don't believe in me." Dad laughed, the tension breaking like a snapped rubber band. "Noted. Though I suspect there won't be a next time. You're going to be too busy actually leading civic initiatives to need any more tests." As we walked toward the parking lot, now mostly empty except for our cars and a few stragglers, I thought about the morning's transformation. 12 hours ago, I'd been a college student whose parents saw her as an enthusiastic but inexperienced young adult. Now I was a County Civic Leadership Award recipient with a graduate scholarship and a job offer that could define my entire career trajectory. But the most significant change wasn't in my external circumstances. It was in my understanding of how civic leadership actually worked. Not through grand gestures or political speeches, but through competent problem-solving applied when and where it was needed most. The voter registration drive had succeeded beyond all projections, not because of perfect planning or ideal conditions, but because when crisis threatened to undermine democratic participation, someone stepped forward with the knowledge and commitment to fix it. That was the lesson worth remembering, regardless of awards or recognition. In a functioning democracy, civic leadership wasn't about titles or positions. It was about being prepared to serve when your community needed you most. Tomorrow, I would start planning the voter access initiatives Mrs. Chen had mentioned. Next month, I would attend the formal award ceremony. Next fall, I would begin graduate studies that would prepare me for increased civic responsibility. But today had been about something simpler and more fundamental, ensuring that every eligible citizen could exercise their right to vote. Everything else was just the framework that made that core mission possible. As I drove home behind my parents' car, I thought about the morning's conversations and the evening's revelations. The journey from dismissed daughter to recognized civic leader had happened in the span of a single day, but it had been building through years of preparation I hadn't fully appreciated until it mattered most. The real question wasn't whether I was ready for the responsibilities I'd just accepted. The real question was whether I could continue growing into the kind of civic leader my community deserved, someone who would always prioritize democratic participation over personal recognition. I thought I could. More importantly, I thought I would have the chance to find out. The following Monday morning arrived with the peculiar sensation of waking up in a life that belonged to someone else. My alarm went off at the usual time, but instead of rushing to my political theory seminar, I found myself staring at the leather portfolio on my dresser, wondering if Saturday's events had actually happened or if I'd dreamed the entire thing. The doubt lasted exactly until I opened my laptop and found 17 emails from county officials, 3 from local newspaper reporters, and 1 from the university's dean of political science requesting a meeting at my earliest convenience. Reality had a way of making itself undeniable, even when it arrived in forms you'd never anticipated. The first email was from Mrs. Chen, sent at 6:30 that morning, with the subject line, "Voter Access Initiative, Timeline and Expectations." She'd attached a 40-page document outlining the county's plans for expanding voter registration and education programs, along with a preliminary budget that made my eyes widen. The scope was far beyond anything I'd imagined when I'd accepted the position.
My phone buzzed as I walked across campus, showing a text from Mrs. Chen. "Available for lunch meeting today? Need to discuss initiative timeline and community partnerships." The professional world was moving at a pace that academia had never prepared me for. In college, important decisions evolved over weeks or months of consideration. In county government, apparently, major initiatives launched with lunch meetings scheduled on Monday morning. I texted back my availability and spent the remaining walk to my car thinking about the strange duality of my current situation. Part of me was still a college student worried about credit requirements and GPA maintenance. The other part was a County Civic Leadership Award recipient being consulted on voter access initiatives that would affect thousands of people. The lunch meeting took place at a small restaurant near the county courthouse, the kind of place where local government officials conducted informal business over sandwiches and coffee. Mrs. Chen had claimed a corner booth and was reviewing documents when I arrived, her efficiency making even meal planning look like strategic planning. "Elena," she said, standing to shake my hand with the formal courtesy that characterized all our interactions, "thank you for adjusting your schedule on short notice. The initiative timeline has accelerated, and I wanted to discuss your role before we finalize community partnerships." She'd ordered us both iced tea and was clearly prepared to use lunch as a working meeting, spreading papers across the table with practiced organization. The top document was a revised timeline showing initiative launches beginning in January, exactly when my graduate coursework would begin. "The county commissioners approved an expanded budget for voter access programs," she explained, pointing to budget lines that represented more money than I'd ever been responsible for managing. "We now have funding for 6 mobile registration units, 12 community education coordinators, and a comprehensive digital outreach campaign." I studied the numbers, trying to process the scale of what we were discussing. And my role in coordinating this? Primary liaison between county administration and community organizations. You'll be responsible for scheduling mobile unit deployments, training community coordinators, and managing digital outreach content development. The responsibilities were significant enough to require full-time attention, which raised an obvious question about balancing graduate coursework with professional obligations. Mrs. Chen seemed to anticipate my concern. "The position includes flexible scheduling accommodation for academic requirements," she said, sliding another document toward me. "County policy supports employee education, and your graduate program focuses on exactly the kind of work you'll be doing professionally." The arrangement made sense theoretically, but I suspected the reality of balancing graduate school with managing a major civic initiative would be more challenging than policy documents suggested. Still, the opportunity was extraordinary, and the work aligned perfectly with my career goals. "What kind of community partnerships are we establishing?" I asked, reviewing the organizational contact list she'd provided. "We're working with public libraries for voter education workshops, community colleges for student registration drives, senior centers for accessibility-focused outreach, and immigrant services organizations for multilingual programming." Each partnership represented a different demographic group with distinct needs and communication preferences. The coordination challenge was complex enough to require sophisticated project management skills, but the potential impact was exactly what I'd hoped to achieve in civic work. "There's something else we need to discuss," Mrs. Chen said, her tone shifting slightly. "The initiative has attracted attention from state and federal election officials. Your performance during the registration crisis has been noted at levels beyond county government." The comment sent a chill of both excitement and anxiety through my chest. "What kind of attention?" "Positive attention," she assured me quickly, "but also the kind of attention that comes with increased expectations and scrutiny. If this initiative succeeds, it could become a model for voter access programs statewide." The implications settled over me gradually. Success would establish my reputation as a civic leader capable of managing complex programs with significant community impact. Failure would be equally visible, potentially affecting not just my career prospects, but also the communities we were trying to serve. "No pressure," I said with a weak smile. Mrs. Chen's expression softened into something approaching warmth. "Elena, the reason you received this award isn't just because you demonstrated civic knowledge under pressure. It's because you showed genuine commitment to ensuring democratic participation regardless of personal recognition." She gathered the papers spread across our table, organizing them with the same precision she applied to everything. "That commitment is exactly what this initiative requires. The technical skills can be learned, but the dedication to serving others is something that can't be taught." We spent the remaining lunch hour discussing specific timeline requirements, community organization meetings, and the training schedule for mobile unit coordinators. By the time we parted ways, I had a detailed understanding of what the next 6 months would require, both academically and professionally. Driving back to campus for my afternoon classes, I reflected on the morning's conversations and their collective message. Everyone seemed confident in my ability to handle accelerated degree completion while launching a major civic initiative, but their confidence felt simultaneously reassuring and overwhelming. The real test wouldn't be whether I could manage the workload, but whether I could maintain the quality of attention that each responsibility deserved.
Academic success required sustained intellectual focus, while professional success demanded practical problem-solving and interpersonal skills. My political theory professor noticed my distraction during the afternoon seminar, pausing mid-lecture to ask if I had questions about democratic participation frameworks. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was studying theories of civic engagement while actively implementing them in professional practice. After class, I stayed behind to discuss my accelerated graduation timeline with Professor Washington, who'd been my advisor for 3 years and had encouraged my internship applications with the county office. "I heard about the award," she said with genuine pleasure. "The General Carter recognition is extraordinary for someone your age. Are you confident about early graduation?" "I think so," I replied, realizing that confidence was something I'd been assuming rather than actually examining. "The timeline is aggressive, but the opportunity is too important to delay." Professor Washington studied my face with the perceptive attention of someone who'd guided hundreds of students through academic transitions. "Elena, you've always been exceptionally focused on civic service, but remember that sustainable careers require balance and perspective." Her concern echoed my parents' earlier comments, and I appreciated the reminder that professional success meant more than just accepting every opportunity that aligned with my goals. "What would you recommend?" I asked. "Complete your degree requirements, absolutely. Take the award and the position. But also remember that you're establishing patterns of work and life balance that will define your entire career. Don't sacrifice long-term sustainability for short-term achievement."
The advice resonated more deeply than I'd expected. In the excitement of Saturday's recognition and Monday's planning meetings, I'd been focusing on logistics and timelines without considering the broader implications of the pace I was establishing. "How do you maintain perspective when opportunities exceed your experience level?" I asked. "By remembering that civic leadership is a marathon, not a sprint," she replied. "The communities you serve will benefit more from sustained commitment than from burnout disguised as dedication." That evening, I sat at my desk reviewing the academic schedule Dean Martinez had provided alongside the professional timeline Mrs. Chen had outlined. The integration was complex but achievable, assuming I could maintain focus and energy for 6 months of intensive work. But Professor Washington's comments about sustainability kept returning as I planned the coming weeks. The voter access initiative was important work that could genuinely improve democratic participation in our community. My academic completion was a necessary step toward the graduate preparation I'd need for long-term civic service. Neither goal was optional, but both required the kind of sustained attention that could easily become overwhelming if I didn't establish clear boundaries and realistic expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Jess, my roommate and closest friend, who'd been studying abroad during Saturday's events and had just learned about my award through social media posts she'd missed. "Congratulations on becoming a civic leadership superstar while I was gone. Coffee tomorrow to hear everything?" I realized that I hadn't spoken with any of my friends since Saturday, too caught up in academic planning and professional meetings to maintain normal social connections. The recognition that I was already beginning to lose balance came as a useful wake-up call. I texted back confirming coffee plans, then spent the rest of the evening reviewing course syllabi and assignment schedules with the goal of establishing realistic timelines rather than optimistic projections. The Voter Access Initiative would launch in January, regardless of my personal preparation level. My graduate program would begin at the same time, with expectations that wouldn't be reduced because of professional obligations. Academic requirements would continue accumulating, according to university deadlines that had been established months before Saturday's award ceremony. The challenge wasn't just managing multiple responsibilities, but managing them at a level of quality that justified the confidence others had placed in me. Saturday's crisis had demonstrated that I could perform under pressure, but sustained excellence required different skills than emergency problem-solving. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the strange trajectory my life had taken over the past 4 days. Thursday, I'd been a college student whose parents didn't take her civic interests seriously. Monday, I was a county award recipient with graduate school acceptance and professional responsibilities that could influence democratic participation for thousands of people.
The transformation felt simultaneously gradual and instantaneous, like I'd been preparing for this opportunity my entire academic career while being completely surprised by its arrival. Tomorrow would bring another round of academic planning, professional meetings, and social connections that I'd need to maintain while navigating between my old life as a college student and my new role as a civic leader. The challenge ahead wasn't just managing the workload, but integrating these different aspects of my life into something sustainable and authentic. Saturday had proven that I could rise to meet unexpected challenges, but the real test would be whether I could maintain that level of performance over months rather than hours. Before falling asleep, I made a mental note to remember Professor Washington's advice about civic leadership being a marathon rather than a sprint. The communities I hoped to serve deserved leaders who could maintain perspective and effectiveness over time, not just during crisis moments. The opportunity I'd been given was extraordinary, but it would only remain so if I could approach it with the kind of thoughtful commitment that would serve both my professional goals and the democratic principles that motivated them. December arrived with the peculiar intensity that comes when multiple deadlines converge into a single moment of reckoning. My final undergraduate exams were scheduled for the same week as the pilot launch of our mobile voter registration program, which meant that theoretical knowledge about democratic participation was being tested simultaneously with its practical implementation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was writing essays about civic engagement theory while coordinating the largest voter access initiative in county history. The mobile registration units had arrived 3 days earlier, sleek vehicles equipped with satellite internet, accessible ramps, and multilingual services that transformed mundane government services into something that looked almost futuristic. Mrs. Chen had insisted on field testing every system before the official launch, which meant spending my study breaks troubleshooting tablet connectivity and verifying database synchronization protocols. Standing in the parking lot behind the county courthouse, watching our team conduct final equipment checks, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. 4 months of accelerated coursework, countless community partnership meetings, staff training sessions that ran late into evenings, and budget reviews that required understanding governmental funding mechanisms I'd only read about in textbooks. My phone buzzed with a text from Dean Martinez. Final exam schedule confirmed for Thursday and Friday. Graduate application processing complete. Congratulations on maintaining academic excellence during an extraordinary semester. Academic excellence felt like an understatement for what the past few months had required. Overloading credits while managing a professional initiative had meant developing time management skills that bordered on the supernatural. I'd learned to write policy memos between classes, conduct community partnership meetings during lunch breaks, and study for comprehensive exams while reviewing voter education materials. The integration had been exhausting but also exhilarating because every academic concept I encountered had immediate practical application in the work I was doing professionally. Constitutional law principles informed voter access policies. Public administration theories guided budget allocation decisions. Political science research shaped community outreach strategies. "Elena, we need you at Unit 3, called Marcus, our lead technician who'd been testing registration software since 7 that morning. The accessibility interface is responding differently than during laboratory trials." I walked over to the third mobile unit where a volunteer in a wheelchair was attempting to navigate the voter registration process using our adaptive technology. The system was functional but clunky, requiring multiple screen transitions that would slow processing times significantly during actual deployment. "Show me the specific difficulty," I said, climbing into the unit to observe the registration sequence firsthand. The volunteer, Mrs. Rodriguez from our disability advocacy partner organization, demonstrated the problem with patient precision. The touchscreen calibration assumes standard reach parameters, but wheelchair users approach from different angles. The interface keeps timing out before I can complete section transitions. I watched her navigate through several registration screens, noting where the system failed to accommodate adaptive approaches. The solution wasn't technically complex, but it required understanding user experience from perspectives our development team hadn't adequately considered. "Marcus, can we adjust the timeout intervals and add larger touch targets for critical navigation buttons?" Absolutely, but it'll require about 2 hours of system reconfiguration across all units. 2 hours we didn't have, according to the launch timeline Mrs. Chen had established. But 2 hours that were essential if we wanted the program to actually serve all community members effectively. The decision highlighted the perpetual tension between political deadlines and practical implementation quality. Do the reconfiguration, I decided. We'll delay the launch by half a day rather than deploy a system that excludes people we're specifically trying to serve. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled with the approval of someone who'd spent years advocating for accessible design. That's the kind of thinking that makes the difference between programs that look inclusive and programs that actually are inclusive. Her comment reminded me of conversations from my disability studies course, where we'd examined the gap between legal compliance and genuine accessibility. Academic theory was informing real-world decision-making in ways that felt both natural and significant. Miss
Chen appeared at the unit's entrance, having observed our accessibility testing from across the parking lot. System modifications? Essential adjustments for users with mobility accommodations, I explained. It'll push our launch to tomorrow afternoon, but it ensures the program actually works for everyone we're trying to reach. She nodded approvingly, though I could see her mental recalculation of logistics and community notification requirements. Better to launch correctly than quickly. Can the community partners adjust their promotion timing? I'll contact the partnership coordinators now, I replied, already mentally reviewing the notification list we'd need to update. The next hour was spent managing communication adjustments while technicians reconfigured registration interfaces. I found myself coordinating between software developers, community organization liaisons, accessibility advocates, and county administrators, each group operating with different priorities and communication styles. The complexity reminded me of case studies from my public administration courses, where successful program implementation required balancing technical requirements with political expectations while maintaining focus on actual community needs. Theoretical frameworks were proving surprisingly applicable to practical decision-making. My phone rang with a call from Councilwoman Torres, whose district included 3 of our planned mobile unit deployment sites. Elena, I heard about the launch delay. Is there a technical problem with the registration system? The question carried the subtle tension of elected officials who needed to explain program changes to constituents who'd been expecting services according to original timelines. Political accountability added another layer of complexity to implementation decisions. Not a technical problem, but an accessibility optimization, I clarified. We discovered that our interface wasn't adequately serving wheelchair users, so we're making adjustments to ensure full compliance with ADA requirements. How long will the optimization take? We'll be operational tomorrow afternoon with a system that truly serves all community members. Councilwoman Torres paused, processing the implications. Actually, that's exactly the kind of attention to detail that builds community trust. Take the time you need to do it right. Her response illustrated something I'd been learning throughout the semester about the relationship between civic leadership and community expectations. Residents didn't just want efficient services, they wanted evidence that their government considered their diverse needs and circumstances. As afternoon shifted toward evening, our team completed system modifications and conducted final testing with volunteers representing different accessibility requirements. The improved interface worked smoothly for users approaching from various angles and mobility levels, processing registrations with the efficiency and accuracy we'd projected during planning phases. Standing in the parking lot as technicians secured equipment for overnight storage, I reflected on the day's lessons about implementation complexity. Academic preparation had provided theoretical frameworks and analytical skills, but professional experience was teaching me about the practical judgments that determined whether programs actually achieve their intended goals. Mrs. Chen approached as I was reviewing tomorrow's deployment schedule, her expression mixing satisfaction with the careful attention to detail that characterized all her work. Elena, you made the right call about the accessibility modifications. It would have been easy to launch on schedule and address problems later, but you prioritized community service over administrative convenience. Her approval meant more than I'd expected, coming from someone whose professional reputation was built on managing complex programs successfully. But beyond personal validation, her comment highlighted something important about civic leadership priorities.
"The program only matters if it actually works for the people it's supposed to serve," I replied. "Timeline adjustments are temporary, but accessibility barriers affect people permanently." "That perspective is exactly why you received the General Carter Award," she said. "Technical competence is important, but commitment to equitable service is what distinguishes effective civic leaders." That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing final exam materials while also preparing deployment schedules for the following day's mobile registration launch. The integration felt natural now, academic concepts and professional applications informing each other in ways that enhanced both understanding and implementation effectiveness. My roommate Jess looked up from her own studying with the expression of someone who'd been observing my semester-long transformation. "Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you hadn't spoken up during that voter registration crisis?" The question prompted reflection I'd been avoiding during months of intensive academic and professional focus. Saturday's intervention had set in motion changes that affected every aspect of my daily experience, from course selection to career trajectory to personal identity. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I think I was always heading toward this kind of work. The award just accelerated the timeline." Still, it's pretty incredible that one morning of crisis management led to graduate school acceptance and a professional position that aligns perfectly with your interests. She was right, though the connection felt less like coincidence and more like preparation meeting opportunity. Years of internship experience, academic focus, and civic engagement had created the knowledge base that made Saturday's intervention possible. The recognition had followed from competence rather than luck. My phone buzzed with an email from Commissioner Williams, sent late in the evening with the subject line "Launch Day Observers." The message indicated that state election officials would be attending tomorrow's mobile registration deployment, evaluating our program as a potential model for implementation in other counties. Success could influence voter access initiatives across the region, while problems could undermine similar programs before they launched. No pressure at all. I forwarded the email to Mrs. Chen with a note asking whether additional preparation was needed for state-level observation. Her response came within minutes. "Just implement the program we've planned and tested. The work speaks for itself." Her confidence was reassuring, but I spent extra time that evening reviewing deployment protocols and contingency plans. State officials would be evaluating not just our technical systems, but our community engagement strategies, accessibility accommodations, and overall program effectiveness. The next morning arrived with December weather that tested both equipment reliability and volunteer commitment. Mobile registration units deployed to community centers, shopping plazas, and senior housing complexes across the county, each staffed by teams we'd trained on voter assistance protocols and emergency procedures. I positioned myself at the central coordination station, monitoring registration volumes, troubleshooting technical issues, and maintaining communication with deployment teams. Mrs. Chen managed state official interactions while I focused on operational oversight and problem solving. The first few hours proceeded smoothly, with registration numbers exceeding our projections and accessibility accommodations working effectively. Community response was enthusiastic, particularly from populations who'd previously faced barriers to voter registration due to transportation limitations or scheduling conflicts. Then, Unit 4 reported a crisis that threatened to undermine the entire program's credibility. "Elena, we have a situation at the Riverside Shopping Plaza," Marcus radioed from the field coordination vehicle. "Technical malfunction has corrupted the registration database, and we've lost approximately 40 completed applications." My stomach dropped. Losing voter registrations wasn't just a technical problem, it was a breach of public trust that could affect people's ability to participate in upcoming elections. State observers were at that specific site, evaluating our program's reliability and professionalism. "What's the extent of data loss?" I asked, already mentally reviewing recovery protocols we'd established during planning phases. "Complete database corruption for registrations completed between 10:15 and 11:30. The backup system didn't engage automatically. 40 registrations represented 40 people who'd taken time from their day to participate in democratic processes, trusting that our program would handle their information competently. Technical failures affected real people with real expectations about governmental reliability. Implement manual backup recovery immediately," I instructed.
Contact everyone who registered during that time frame and arrange for re-registration completion. Full transparency about the technical problem and our corrective measures. The solution was straightforward procedurally but complex logistically. We needed to identify affected individuals, explain the situation honestly, and provide convenient options for completing their registrations before the deadline. Mrs. Chen appeared at my coordination station, having received updates about the database crisis from field observers. State officials are asking about our contingency protocols. We're implementing comprehensive recovery procedures, I replied. Every affected registration will be completed successfully, and we're documenting the technical failure for systems improvement. Timeline for full resolution. All affected individuals will be contacted within 2 hours and offered immediate re-registration appointments. Full recovery by end of business day. She nodded approvingly, then returned to manage state official communications while I coordinated recovery operations. The crisis was manageable but required sustained attention to detail and community communication. Over the next 3 hours, our team contacted every person affected by the database corruption, explained the technical problem transparently, and arranged for expedited re-registration completion. Most community members appreciated our proactive communication and efficient problem-solving, though several expressed understandable frustration about governmental reliability. By afternoon, we'd successfully recovered all lost registrations and implemented additional backup protocols to prevent similar problems. State officials completed their evaluation with apparent satisfaction, noting our crisis response procedures as particularly effective. Mrs. Chen found me as teams were securing equipment after the day's final deployments. Elena, the state observers were impressed with our recovery management. Technical problems happen, but professional response distinguishes successful programs. Her comment provided perspective on the day's events. The database corruption had felt like a potential disaster while it was happening, but our systematic response had demonstrated exactly the kind of professional competence that state officials wanted to see in programs they might replicate. What did they think about the overall initiative? They're recommending our model for implementation in 6 other counties, with particular emphasis on accessibility accommodations and community partnership strategies. The news was extraordinary. Our local voter access program would influence democratic participation efforts across the state, potentially affecting thousands of people who faced barriers to civic engagement. Saturday's crisis intervention had led to recognition that could improve voting access far beyond our original community. That evening, I sat in the campus library completing my final undergraduate exam, a comprehensive assessment of democratic theory and civic engagement principles. The questions covered topics I'd been implementing professionally for months, creating strange resonance between academic evaluation and practical experience. Writing essays about voter access barriers while having spent the day managing mobile registration deployments created a perspective on civic engagement that pure academic study couldn't provide. Theoretical frameworks gain depth and significance when informed by actual implementation challenges and community interactions. My phone buzzed quietly with a text from Professor Washington. Heard about today's successful launch and state recognition. Proud of your integration of academic learning with professional service. The acknowledgement meant more than I'd expected, coming from someone who'd guided my academic development and encouraged my civic interests. But beyond personal validation, her message highlighted something important about the relationship between education and public service. Academic preparation provided analytical tools and theoretical frameworks, but civic leadership required translating knowledge into action that served real community needs. The integration was challenging, but ultimately what made both education and public service meaningful. As I finished my final exam and prepared to leave the library, I reflected on the semester's transformation from college student to civic leader. The timeline had been compressed and intensive, but every challenge had prepared me for subsequent responsibilities in ways that normal academic progression couldn't have provided. Tomorrow would bring graduate program orientation and continued expansion of the Voter Access Initiative.
Next month would include formal award ceremony recognition and planning for statewide program implementation. Next year would involve responsibilities I couldn't yet fully anticipate. But tonight, I felt the satisfaction that comes from completing complex work successfully while maintaining academic excellence and professional integrity. The goals I'd set years earlier about civic engagement and democratic service were becoming reality through opportunities I'd earned by demonstrating competence when it mattered most. Walking across campus toward my car, I thought about Saturday's voter registration crisis and the chain of events it had initiated. One morning of speaking up when others remained silent had led to recognition, opportunity, and responsibility that would define my career trajectory for years to come. The experience had taught me something fundamental about civic leadership. It wasn't just about having knowledge or good intentions, but about applying that knowledge effectively when communities needed it most. Academic preparation was essential, but civic service required courage to act when action could make a difference. 6 months ago, I'd been a college student whose parents dismissed her political insights as youthful enthusiasm. Today, I was a county civic leader whose work was being recognized at state levels and replicated in other communities. The transformation hadn't happened through grand gestures or political connections, but through competent problem-solving applied when expertise was needed most. Civic leadership, I'd learned, was less about titles and recognition than about being prepared to serve when your community needed you most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight I felt ready for whatever came next. The semester had proven that I could manage complex academic and professional demands while maintaining focus on community service. More importantly, it had confirmed that civic engagement was exactly where I belonged. As I drove home through streets where our mobile registration units had operated throughout the day, I thought about the hundreds of people who'd completed voter registrations that would enable their participation in upcoming elections. Technical systems and administrative procedures mattered, but ultimately, the work was about ensuring that every eligible citizen could exercise their fundamental right to democratic participation. That principle had guided every decision from Saturday's crisis intervention through today's statewide program launch. It would continue guiding my work as I transitioned from undergraduate student to graduate school and expanded professional responsibilities. The future felt full of possibilities I'd never imagined 6 months earlier. Opportunities to influence democratic participation at levels beyond local community service. But regardless of scope or recognition, the core mission remained constant, ensuring that civic engagement was accessible to everyone who wanted to participate. Sometimes the most important voices are the ones we almost didn't hear, and sometimes the most significant changes begin when someone decides to speak up instead of staying silent. 6 months ago, I'd chosen to step forward when conventional approaches were failing. Tonight, I was ready to continue stepping forward whenever my community needed civic leadership applied with competence and integrity. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the state capitol building, addressing an audience of election officials, community leaders, and civic advocates who'd gathered to hear about replicating our voter access program across 12 additional counties. The girl who'd been dismissed as too young to understand real politics was now presenting implementation strategies to officials responsible for democratic participation in communities throughout the region. The presentation went smoothly, covering technical specifications, community partnership frameworks, and accessibility protocols that had evolved from our pilot program into a comprehensive model for voter engagement. Questions from the audience revealed genuine interest in adapting our approaches to diverse demographic and geographic contexts. But the moment that mattered most came during the break, when an elderly gentleman approached me with the careful walk of someone whose mobility required deliberate attention.
"Miss Rodriguez," he said, extending his hand with formal courtesy. "My name is Harold Chen, and I wanted to thank you personally for what your program accomplished in our community." The name didn't immediately register until he continued speaking. "My daughter Margaret works for your county office. She told me about the young woman who redesigned the voter registration system to make it accessible for people like me." Recognition hit me with unexpected emotion. Mrs. Chen's father, a man whose voting participation had been limited by mobility challenges until our mobile units began deploying to senior housing complexes and community centers. Mr. Chen, it's an honor to meet you. How was your experience with the mobile registration service? His face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone whose civic engagement had been restored after years of logistical barriers. For the first time in 8 years, I was able to register to vote without asking my family to drive me across town and wait while I navigated systems that weren't designed for wheelchairs. He paused, choosing his words carefully. More than that, the volunteers understood what I needed without making me feel like a burden. That kind of dignity in civic participation matters more than you might realize. Our conversation continued for several minutes, covering his experience with the mobile registration process and his subsequent participation in local elections. His feedback reinforced lessons I'd learned throughout the program development. Accessibility wasn't just about legal compliance, but about ensuring that civic engagement preserved personal dignity and independence. As state officials reconvened for the afternoon session, I reflected on the journey from Saturday morning crisis to statewide program recognition. The transformation felt both gradual and sudden. Years of preparation meeting opportunities I'd never anticipated at timelines I couldn't have planned. The presentation concluded with commitments from 8 counties to implement modified versions of our voter access initiative, each adapting core principles to local demographic needs and resource limitations. State funding would support equipment purchases and staff training, extending the program's reach far beyond our original community boundaries. Walking out of the Capitol building, I felt the peculiar satisfaction that comes from seeing local problem-solving evolve into systemic change. The database corruption crisis that had threatened our program's credibility had become a case study in effective contingency planning. The accessibility modifications that delayed our launch had become standard requirements for voter registration technology. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Watched the presentation live stream at work. Dad cried during your opening remarks about civic participation being a right, not a privilege." The message brought unexpected emotion to what had been a professionally focused day. My parents had witnessed my transformation from dismissed daughter to recognized civic leader, supporting my accelerated academic timeline and compressed career development with patience and pride. That evening, I drove back to the county office where everything had started, parking in the same lot where mobile registration units had conducted their first deployment tests. Mrs. Chen was working late, reviewing quarterly program reports that documented registration numbers, demographic outreach, and community partnership effectiveness. "How did the state presentation go?" she asked, looking up from spreadsheets that quantified our initiative's impact in ways that still amazed me. 8 counties committed to implementation, with state funding approved for equipment and training. She nodded with satisfaction that mixed professional achievement with personal mentorship pride. "Elena, when you stepped forward during that registration crisis, I don't think either of us anticipated it would lead to statewide program expansion." Her observation prompted reflection on the unpredictable nature of civic leadership opportunities. Saturday's intervention had felt like simple problem-solving, applying knowledge I'd gained through internship experience to address immediate community needs. The recognition and subsequent opportunities had followed from competence rather than ambition. "Do you think it would have happened anyway?" I asked. "The program expansion, the state recognition, the broader impact?" Mrs. Chen considered the question carefully. "The need for improved voter access existed regardless of your involvement. But translating need into effective programs requires someone willing to bridge the gap between theoretical solutions and practical implementation." She gestured toward the reports documenting thousands of voter registrations, community partnerships that had strengthened civic engagement, and accessibility improvements that had become model standards. What happened here started with one person recognizing that conventional approaches weren't serving community needs effectively. Everything else followed from that moment of civic courage. Her words crystallized something I'd been thinking about throughout the program's development. Civic leadership wasn't just about having good intentions or technical knowledge, but about applying that knowledge when action could make a difference for real people facing real barriers.
As I prepared to leave the office, Mrs. Chen handed me a folder containing preliminary planning documents for our next initiative, a comprehensive civic education program targeting young adults who'd historically been underrepresented in local elections. Your graduate coursework focuses on voter engagement strategies, and your professional experience demonstrates effective community outreach. Interested in leading program development? The offer represented another opportunity to translate academic preparation into community service, continuing the integration of education and civic engagement that had defined my trajectory since Saturday's crisis intervention. Absolutely, I replied, already mentally reviewing research on youth civic participation and community education strategies. Driving home through neighborhoods where our mobile registration units had operated throughout the year, I thought about the hundreds of people who'd completed voter registrations that enabled their participation in local and state elections. Technical systems and administrative procedures had mattered, but ultimately the work had been about ensuring democratic participation was accessible to everyone who wanted to engage. The girl who'd been dismissed as too young to understand real politics had become a civic leader whose work was influencing democratic participation across multiple communities. The transformation hadn't happened through political connections or dramatic gestures, but through competent problem-solving applied when expertise was needed most. Saturday morning had taught me that sometimes the most important voices are the ones we almost didn't hear, and sometimes the most significant changes begin when someone decides to speak up instead of staying silent. 6 months later, I was ready to continue speaking up whenever my community needed civic leadership applied with integrity and effectiveness. The future felt full of possibilities for expanding democratic participation and strengthening community engagement. But regardless of scope or recognition, the core mission remained constant, ensuring that every eligible citizen could exercise their fundamental right to participate in the democratic process that shaped their lives. Sometimes being written off as deadweight is just the beginning of proving your actual worth. And sometimes the knowledge others dismiss as irrelevant turns out to be exactly what saves the day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.